U.S.-backed forces in Syria are celebrating the defeat of ISIS in Raqqa.
Losing Raqqa is a major blow for ISIS.
The latest pictures from Raqqa don't exactly give a sense of success. It's a virtual ghost city.
As U.S.-backed forces spin around in celebration.
Part two of our Syria-related program now, the coverage of the refugee story next door in Lebanon and the resulting rise of what some are calling a fascist climate there. A few months back, a provocative article appeared in a leading French-language newspaper in Beirut, L'Orient Le Jour. 300 people put their names to it, journalists, activists, and intellectuals. They were protesting against the incitement of hatred against Syrian refugees. Among those accused of creating that climate are the country's highly politicized media outlets. Pick up a newspaper or turn on the TV and you might conclude that the problems that have plagued Lebanon for years, daily electricity cuts, a lack of jobs, pollution, all began with the arrival of the refugees. The toxic rhetoric often starts at the political level. However, since almost every news outlet in Lebanon has some kind of political backing, political affiliation, that rhetoric then finds its way into the reporting. The Listening Post's Tarek Nafi now on the fear and loathing of Syrian refugees in Lebanon.
هالأطفال اللي عمرهم 5 سنين و6 سنين لما يكبروا شو رح يكونوا؟ هل رح يكونوا مشاريع مجرمين؟
نحن صرنا ضيوف بهالبلد وهن استملكوه.
ديموغرافية لبنان هيدي كارثة.
This is how Syrian refugees are portrayed on Lebanese airwaves.
إيش عنصرية؟ لازم تكون الأولوية للمواطن اللبناني.
The scale of this story is undeniable. Since 2011, 1.5 million Syrians have sought refuge in Lebanon. They now make up a quarter of the country's population. The added strain that influx has put on Lebanon's creaking infrastructure, on its society, is also beyond dispute. But Lebanon's problems did not begin, nor do they end, with refugees. And on a story that requires accuracy and nuance, there is often little of either to be found.
كتار الليلة رح يتهمونا بالعنصرية، ولكن نحن منا مستهدفين حدا. نحن عم نطرح واقع حقيقي عم بيعاني منه لبنان اليوم.
At the very beginning of the conflict, media outlets that were close to the Syrian opposition were very open to the idea of Lebanon welcoming refugees, whereas media outlets that were close to the Assad regime spoke about the refugees with very negative terms. Unfortunately, that narrative became more prominent and managed to convince more people as the refugee crisis kept growing over time.
In the beginning, they would call Syrians لاجئين or refugees, but over time they start to use this term نازحين or displaced, as if they want to make sure that Syrians are just like a temporary thing.
Every day we have a story that crosses the line, whether through news, whether through campaigns, whether through political satire programs or comedy.
يلا روح يلا كود فيلم يلا باي.
Bad reporting has become the norm. One of the latest stories from MTV is about Al-Mina in Tripoli, where you have all these small shops or kiosks on the beachfront, and there is a story that they've turned into places for vice, where all the bad things can be sold and bought. Stories like that are published, again, without any verification. Have you sent anyone there? Do you have any figures? Do you have any witness reports? Nothing. It was just reported as a fact.
I want to tell you where MTV stands. We have no negative stances against displaced Syrians. But as people who work in media, we have a duty to shine a light on problems that are present with some of those who are displaced.
MTV's editor-in-chief says he doesn't recognize any bias in his channel's reporting, but a review of Lebanese media output does show a significant imbalance. In 2015, the Beirut-based Maharat Foundation studied a 3-week sample of refugee coverage. It found Lebanon's print media focused far more on security issues and the burden of asylum than on things like integration, exploitation, or the rights of refugees. The same was true of TV coverage, where more airtime was given to arrests and security procedures than other stories. However, it wasn't only the negative framing, it was the sourcing. The study found that journalists often simply republish reports exactly as they receive them from the security services.
Suddenly have this idea, the reader has an idea that all these criminals are Syrians, the drug dealers, the weapons dealers, the cases of rape and sexual harassment are all coming from Syrians.
إذا بتسأل النيابات العامة بيقولوا لك قد ايه نسبة الجرائم زادت أكثر من 30 و40% من جراء النزوح بلبنان.
But that's because they're picking and choosing from the reports coming from the security service. If you go to any of the security branches in Lebanon and look at their arrest warrants and reports, you have lots of Lebanese people there. But the media focuses on the Syrians because it fits into this narrative about how Syrians are basically the reason Lebanon is in bad shape.
This summer, a series of army operations along the border with Syria heightened fears about the threat posed by refugees and fed a narrative that equates them with terrorists. It began with 2 raids on refugee camps in Arsal, where soldiers were attacked by suicide bombers. Hundreds of Syrians were rounded up in response. 4 died in the army's custody, and allegations that the men were tortured were dismissed.
ضربة محكمة للجيش ضد الإرهاب في جرود عرسال.
The army has a kind of revered status in Lebanon that often puts it beyond criticism. In a country divided by sect and religion, it's seen as one of the few symbols of unity. In the weeks following the raid, protests were banned, hate speech spiked, and critics of the army faced harassment.
خرجت بعض الأصوات المدافعة عن حقوق اللاجئين السوريين ربما من بوابة خالف تعرف عبر التجريح بالجيش اللبناني.
An audio message circulated on WhatsApp calling on Lebanese citizens to defend the army's honor by attacking Syrians in the street.
نحن شباب لبنان اللي بيحب جيش لبنان اللي بيحب لبنان بنشوف سوري بتنزل تضربه هيدا إنسان فاسد إنسان إرهابي نازل يتظاهر ضد جيشنا الشريف.
This was the kind of hate speech that you would hear from some of the extreme parties during civil war, which called for Palestinians to leave entirely, or that even went as far as supporting Israel to wipe out Palestinians from Lebanon. After that audio message came out, there were 2 cases of Syrians being beaten up.
أنت شو اسمك؟ وراءك وين؟ ليش بالبيت؟ ليش بالبيت؟
Then the police identified these men through the videos, and then they were arrested for it. It didn't turn out into this big wave of attacks on Syrians. However, attacks on Syrians do happen. They're often not documented, and so this is not a new phenomenon.
Lebanese politicians condemned those particular cases of hate speech and violence, but they have a track record of inciting the very same kind of fear of Syrians.
لأننا لبنانيين وبنحب الشعب اللبناني عم نطالب بالنازح السوري يرجع على وطنه. ولأننا عنصريين لبنانيين، نعم نحن عنصريين لبنانيين.
In Lebanon, politicians don't have to look far for a friendly voice in the media. The men holding the 3 highest positions of power in the country, the president, the prime minister, and the speaker of parliament, all own a television channel. When high-profile politicians use refugees to deflect from their own shortcomings, hyping up the existential demographic threats facing Lebanon, those fears are eventually reproduced in the media. In some cases, stories like this one have proven to be outright lies, but not before the damage has been done.
We have an issue when it comes to how media outlets is talking about Syrian refugees. The negative approach is dominant, but that is because of the political discourse in Lebanon. These outlets are encouraged by how politicians are talking about refugees. They are encouraged how municipalities are banning Syrian refugees from moving around. They are imposing curfews on Syrian refugees, and nobody is stopping them. So the media reflects that.
Given the structural makeup of media in Lebanon, separating journalism from politics is easier said than done. What reporters can control is how they speak about the most marginalized people in society. Because when it comes to racism, to hatred of the other, it doesn't stop with Syrian refugees.
We know deep well how people speak about Palestinian refugees. The huge problem related to domestic workers in Lebanon coming from Southeast Asia or from Africa. The fact that our country is somehow tolerant to racism is a very, very important problem. And unfortunately, the media is not playing its role in actually educating citizens and trying to shift the debate to a more rational place. This is a very, very negative indicator of where our media outlets are heading.